Hi, in our section about the male reproductive system, I'd like to cover the production of sperm and how those get transported out of the body so that they can be used to fertilize an egg. In your reading, you've seen that the functional unit of the male reproductive system is the testicle, or the testes as they are called. And the testes have a particular set of tubes that make up the bulk of the inside, called the seminiferous tubules. This is where sperm is actually produced. If you take a look at what this looks like on the inside, let me find that figure for you. This is what a cross-section of that seminiferous tubule actually looks like. So in the testes, we have these individual tubes like this, and this is what you're seeing here in this figure. The actual developing sperm are found in the walls of this tubule. The most immature sperm are here on the outer edges, and as they undergo the process of meiosis, which is the division that gets these cells down to that 23 number, that half chromosome number, as these cells undergo the different stages of meiosis, they move closer and closer towards the center of the lumen, until eventually the more mature sperm that actually have the flagellum are released into the inner lumen of the seminiferous tubules. Now, as these sperm get produced here, as new ones are continuing to be pushed in towards the middle, this space fills, and so all of these newly developed sperm are pushed into a structure called the epididymis. The epididymis is an even tighter coiled structure up here, where it's similar to the seminiferous tubule in that it's a very hollow, thin tube, but this epididymis, it's actually about 20 feet long if you stretch it out. And so the length of this tube actually allows for the sperm, it forces them to take a long time passing their way through this particular structure. So as the sperm migrates through this structure, I think it takes about 20 days for them to actually get all the way through. This is where they become mature. They have the ability to swim, because that has to happen in order for these sperm to be functional once they reach the female reproductive tract. Now, the sperm can remain functional in the epididymis for 40 to 60 days. So this is not only the place where they mature, but it's also where they can be stored. If after the 40 to 60 day time period, if an ejaculation has not happened, then all of the sperm that are in the epididymis get broken down and reabsorbed into the walls of the epididymis, basically so that the components can be recycled and used to make new sperm. Now, everything beyond this point is only going to happen in the case of an ejaculation. So remember, storage happens here in the epididymis, but if an ejaculation event occurs, that's when smooth muscle contractions begin that are going to transport all of the sperm from the epididymis and out. So the smooth muscle contractions are another form of peristalsis, like we've talked about. Peristalsis came up in the digestive system because it was the smooth muscle contractions that would move the food through the tract. Peristalsis is also what moves urine through the urinary system, through all those tubes, and the same thing is happening here in the male reproductive system. So this smooth muscle contraction is actually going to be stimulated by, let's think about this for 1 second, it's going to be involved in the autonomic nervous system because we're dealing with smooth muscle contraction. And the actual peristalsis that gets triggered is going to have to be a part of the sympathetic nervous system. So that's what triggers this part to happen. Whoops, sorry about that. So the sympathetic nervous system is what will allow the peristalsis to occur. So once that happens, the sperm move initially into this tube here called the vas deferens. The vas deferens are going to carry the sperm from the epididymis up through the spermatic cord the spermatic cord passes through the abdominopelvic wall. And this is simply the stomach, or the wall to the trunk that leads into the abdominopelvic cavity. Remember that the testes in the scrotum are outside of the body, so this has to move inwards. Now, just as a side note, if you've ever heard of someone who has an inguinal hernia, that happens right here. So this hole in the abdominopelvic wall, where the vas deferens and the blood vessels pass through, this is also where, if in a male, if you're lifting something really heavy, or if something goes on where you have to strain quite a bit, a lot of times men will develop an inguinal hernia because part of the intestines that are actually in this abdominopelvic cavity end up getting pushed out into this inguinal canal where these vas deferens and the spermatic cord is supposed to pass through. That can be extremely painful. It can pinch off a section of the intestines and sometimes has to be surgically repaired. But this is the exact place where an inguinal hernia would occur. So the vas deferens carry the sperm up through the spermatic cord, through the inguinal canal, and into the abdominopelvic cavity. From here, this is another figure showing the same thing. So here's that inguinal canal on both sides that we were talking about. Here are the vas deferens that are carrying the sperm up. The vas deferens loop around the backside of the bladder, and the sperm is now going to pass through or encounter 3 accessory glands. First, we have the seminal vesicles, which are the largest glands there on the backside of the bladder. Then these 2 canals converge and pass through the prostate gland, which is this walnut-sized gland right at the base of the bladder. So the urethra actually passes right through this, and then the urethra continues. These very tiny glands, called the bulbourethral glands, are going to add in components. These are all contributing to the liquid portion of semen. So we have the sperm that comes from the testes through the vas deferens, and as it makes its way through, we're going to add in all of the liquid. So the seminal vesicles produce about 60% of the fluid, the prostate about 30%, and the bulbourethral glands about 10%. Some of the major things that the semen has to include, and I know you guys have looked into this already, it's going to have nutrients. One of the major nutrients is actually fructose. We think of that as fruit sugar, but that's just the chemical component that's created by the seminal vesicles. We have to supply nutrients to the sperm. If you remember, the egg is really large, and it has all of the cytoplasm and nutrients in it. The sperm, in order to be able to travel quickly, had to reduce its amount of cytoplasm, and so because of that, the sperm are left without a lot of nutrient source. And so all of these vesicles, or all of these glands that are contributing to semen, are actually providing the nutrients surrounding the sperm so that they will survive. Another thing that the semen has to include, in addition to the nutrients, is that it always needs to include a base. And actually all 3 of these different glands secrete some type of base into the fluid. Now, why does that have to be that way? Well, in the female reproductive tract, the cells, the mucus cells of the vagina, create an acidic environment, which is a protective function for her, and it is an antibacterial agent in her body. But what it also would do would be that it would kill the sperm. So the semen itself has to have a base in it so that we can get the pH neutralized, just so that the sperm can survive. The other issue is that the urethra in the male is a passageway that works for both urine and for semen, but it can't go through at the same time. However, there may be a residual amount of urine left in the urethra just prior to ejaculation. And so the base that's secreted as a part of the semen is also going to neutralize the male urethra in case there's any acidic urine that's left in there. So these are all some really important components of semen that help the sperm be able to survive and have the nutrients that it needs to be able to make the journey.